The early morning sunlight had barely begun to filter through the windows of Le Chateau when Sofia Martinez arrived for her shift. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and slight shadows under her eyes hinted at another late night. She slipped through the employee entrance, exchanging quiet greetings with the kitchen staff who were already preparing for the day ahead. "Late night again?" asked Roy, the head chef, as he chopped vegetables with practiced precision. Sofia smiled tiredly. "Just practicing. Lost track of time. You and your mysterious hobbies," Roy chuckled, shaking his head. "Whatever it is, you should get more sleep." If only they knew, Sofia thought as she tied her apron and prepared for the morning briefing. To everyone at Le Chateau, she was just a reliable waitress who had been working there for nearly 3 years. She took orders, delivered food, and smiled politely at customers who rarely looked her in the eye. She was part of the backdrop in their dining experience, necessary but not notable. Le Chateau wasn't just any restaurant. It sat in the heart of the city's cultural district, its elegant facade and crystal chandeliers attracting the wealthiest and most influential people in town. Business moguls closed deals over aged wine, politicians discussed strategy over duck confit, and celebrities sought privacy in the corner booths. The tips were excellent, which was precisely why Sofia had applied for the job despite the sometimes condescending treatment from customers. "Remember, everyone, we have the Davenport party in the private room tonight," the floor manager announced during their morning meeting. "They're celebrating a major business merger, so expect them to order our premium wine selection. And please everyone be on your absolute best behavior." As the staff dispersed to their stations, Sofia began preparing the dining room, carefully arranging silverware and folding napkins into perfect triangles. Her movements were automatic, her mind elsewhere as her fingers mimicked the chord progressions she had been practicing until 3 a.m. The restaurant's grand piano sat in the corner of the main dining room. It was an antique Steinway, its wood polished to a warm glow. Occasionally, the restaurant hired pianists for special events, but most days it remained silent, more of a decorative piece than an instrument. Sofia often found her eyes drifting toward it during slow periods of her shift, her fingers itching with the desire to play. No one at Le Chateau knew about her other life. They didn't know that after her shifts, when her feet ached and her back was stiff from carrying trays, she would walk 6 blocks to an old music conservatory where she rented practice time in the basement rooms. They didn't know that she had once been considered a prodigy, that she had performed at prestigious venues before she turned 15, or that critics had once written about her extraordinary emotional depth and technical brilliance beyond her years. The lunch service began promptly at 11:30. Sofia moved efficiently between tables, taking orders and delivering elaborate plates of food. A table of business executives barely acknowledged her as she described the daily specials. A couple on what appeared to be a first date smiled politely, but quickly returned to their conversation. A famous actress wearing sunglasses indoors asked for her water to be replaced because it wasn't cold enough. The Chilean sea bass for table 7, Sofia told Roy as she clipped a new order to the kitchen carousel. "Coming right up," he replied, expertly plating a dish. "How's the crowd today?" "Same as always," she shrugged. Table 12 asked if we have gluten-free options for every item on the menu, and Table 3 complained that their champagne isn't chilled to exactly 45 degrees. Roy laughed. Just another day in paradise. During a brief lull between lunch and dinner service, Sofia sat in the staff break room, nursing a cup of coffee. She scrolled through her phone, checking her calendar. There was a piano competition in 3 months that her former teacher had been urging her to enter. The application deadline was approaching, but Sofia hadn't committed yet. It had been 5 years since she had performed publicly. The accident that claimed her parents' lives had derailed everything. One moment she had been a rising star with scholarship offers from prestigious music schools around the world. The next, she was a 19-year-old orphan with funeral arrangements to make and a mountain of medical bills to pay. Her concert schedule had been canceled, her scholarships deferred and eventually declined. By the time the dust settled, she had convinced herself that her moment had passed. Still, she couldn't bring herself to abandon music entirely, so she worked at Le Chateau, paid her bills, and spent every spare moment at the conservatory, playing pieces that nobody heard but the janitor who occasionally passed by after midnight. The dinner service was always busier than lunch. And tonight was particularly hectic with the Davenport party occupying the private dining room. Sophia moved swiftly between tables, refilling wine glasses and delivering elaborate dishes prepared by Roy and his team. "Miss, this isn't what I ordered," a man in an expensive suit said without looking up from his phone. "I'm sorry, sir?" Sophia apologized, though she was certain he had ordered the coq au vin. "I'll have the kitchen prepare something else right away. Make it quick. We have a show to catch at 8, he replied, still not making eye contact. In the kitchen, Roy confirmed her memory. He definitely ordered the coq au vin. I heard him myself when I went out to describe the special. Sophia sighed. Just make him the filet mignon he's now requesting. Medium rare. Some people, Roy muttered, but began preparing the new dish. The evening continued in much the same way, demanding customers, complex orders, the occasional complaint about trivial matters. By the time her shift ended at 10 p.m., Sophia's feet were throbbing and her smile felt permanently fixed to her face. "Good night, everyone," she called as she hung up her apron and changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room. "You heading straight home tonight?" asked Lily, another server who was just beginning her late shift. "I have some errands to run first," Sophia replied vaguely. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin as she walked the familiar 6 blocks to the conservatory. The old brick building was mostly dark except for a few windows where other night owls like herself were practicing. Mr. Hayes, the elderly security guard, nodded at her as she entered. "Evening, Sophia. Room B3 is all yours tonight. The guy who usually takes B5 canceled, so you won't have any neighbors." "Thanks, Mr. Hayes," she smiled gratefully. The basement was quiet, the soundproofed practice rooms arranged along a dimly lit hallway. Room B3 was small, with just enough space for an upright piano, a chair, and a small table where Sophia set down her bag. The piano wasn't nearly as fine as the Steinway at Le Chateau, but it was well-tuned and had a warm, resonant quality that Sophia had grown to love. She sat at the bench, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then her fingers found the keys and she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne Opera 9 No. 2 filled the small room. Her hands moved with the muscle memory built from thousands of hours of practice, but there was nothing mechanical about her playing. Each note carried emotion, telling stories that words couldn't express. When the piece ended, she moved on to Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a technically demanding piece that required all her concentration. This was what she had been working on for weeks now, the piece she would play if she decided to enter the competition. The complex fingerings and dramatic dynamics allowed her to channel everything she felt, the grief that still lingered, the frustration of her stalled dreams, the lingering hope that perhaps it wasn't too late. Hours passed without her noticing. She played piece after piece, Bach, Beethoven, Liszt, losing herself in the music. When she finally looked at her watch, it was nearly 3 a.m. Mr. Hayes poked his head in. "I'm heading out, Sophia. Don't stay too much longer. You young people need sleep too, you know." "I'll leave soon," she promised. "Just one more piece." Alone in the building now, Sophia turned to a composition of her own, one she had been working on for months. It was still unfinished, still evolving, but it was entirely hers. As she played, she imagined what it would be like to perform it for an audience, not the distracted diners at Le Chateau, but people who came specifically to hear music, who would understand what she was trying to say with each phrase and harmony. When the final notes faded, she sat in silence for a moment before closing the piano lid gently. Tomorrow, or rather, later today, she would be back at the restaurant, invisible again in her black uniform, serving people who saw her as nothing more than a convenience. But for these few hours she had been herself completely, and maybe someday she would find the courage to be that person in the daylight too. As she walked home in the pre-dawn quiet, Sophia made a decision. She would apply for the competition. It might lead nowhere, but at least it would be a step toward reclaiming what she had lost. Not just a career, but a part of herself. 2 weeks had passed since Sophia submitted her application for the piano competition. She'd recorded her audition piece late one night at the conservatory, where Mr. Hayes had helped her set up a small camera. Now the waiting game had begun, and Sophia tried not to think about it too much as she went about her daily routine at Le Chateau. "All hands on deck today," announced Victor, the restaurant manager, during their morning meeting. His usually perfect hair looked slightly disheveled, and he kept checking his phone nervously. Tonight is our 15th anniversary celebration. The guest list includes the mayor, 3 city council members, and several major donors to the arts in our city. The staff exchanged glances. Anniversary events were always high pressure, but this guest list suggested something even more significant than usual. Also, Victor continued, looking more stressed by the second, Anton Riker will be among our guests. A murmur went through the staff. Even Sophia, who tried to keep her head down and focus on her job, knew that name. Anton Riker was the director of the city symphony and had connections to every important music venue in the country. His reputation for discovering new talent was legendary. We have a special menu prepared, and Giovanni Bianchi will be performing on the piano throughout the evening. I need everyone at their absolute best tonight. Sophia felt a small pang of envy at the mention of the pianist. Giovanni Bianchi was well known in classical music circles, not a superstar, but respected and established. He would be playing the same Steinway that Sophia often gazed at longingly during her shifts. The day passed in a flurry of preparations. Extra staff had been called in to polish every piece of silverware, dust every corner, and arrange elaborate floral centerpieces on each table. The kitchen was chaotic with activity, as Roy and his team prepared components for the evening's special menu. Sophia was assigned to help set up the private dining area where the VIP guests would be seated. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The restaurant looked magnificent, with soft lighting glowing from the chandeliers and fresh flowers perfuming the air. The staff gathered for a final briefing before guests began to arrive. Giovanni's flight landed an hour ago, Victor told them, looking slightly more relaxed. He'll be here by 6 to set up and begin playing as guests arrive at 7. By 6:30, Sophia was dressed in the special black uniform with gold trim that had been designed for the occasion. She stood at her assigned station, mentally reviewing the evening's special menu so she could describe each dish properly to her tables. At 6:45, Victor's phone rang. The staff watched as his face fell. He stepped away to take the call, but they could all see his animated gestures and the way his free hand came up to grip his hair in obvious distress. When he returned, his face was pale. Giovanni's taxi was caught in an accident on the highway. He's fine, but he's still with the police giving a statement and won't make it here in time. A shocked silence fell over the group. Can we get someone else? Asked Lily. Victor shook his head miserably. Not on such short notice. Everyone is already booked for weekend performances. I've called everyone I know. The staff exchanged worried glances. The piano was central to the evening's ambiance, and the owner, Mr. Lamont, had specifically advertised live classical music as part of the anniversary celebration. Maybe we can just use recorded music? Suggested one of the newer servers. Mr. Lamont would have my head, Victor muttered. He specifically wanted live piano music for the culture and sophistication it adds. He checked his watch. The first guests will arrive in less than 15 minutes, and Mr. Lamont will be here any minute to inspect everything. Sophia felt her heart racing. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but she couldn't quite get them out. What if she embarrassed herself? What if she wasn't good enough? It had been 5 years since she'd performed for anyone but herself. But then she thought of her application to the competition, sitting in some judge's inbox. She thought of the hours she spent practicing, and of her decision to stop hiding that part of herself. Before she could reconsider, she stepped forward. Victor, she said quietly. I can play. Victor glanced at her distractedly. What's that, Sophia? I can play the piano, she repeated, louder this time. I'm a classical pianist. Now everyone was staring at her. Victor gave a short, stressed laugh. This isn't the time for jokes, Sophia. I'm not joking, she insisted. I studied at the Royal Conservatory before I started working here. I know most of the standard classical repertoire. Victor looked at her skeptically. You're telling me you're a trained pianist? And you've been working as a waitress here for 3 years? Sophia nodded. Life happened. But I can play. I can cover tonight's performance. A mix of hope and doubt crossed Victor's face. Can you sight read? Yes. Do you know Chopin? Debussy, Mozart? All of them, Sophia confirmed. I was practicing Rachmaninoff last night. Victor glanced at his watch again. Mr. Lamont will be here any minute, and guests will start arriving right after. He seemed to be weighing his options, which were admittedly few. Fine, he finally said. Show me what you can do. Now. Heart pounding, Sophia followed Victor to the grand piano in the corner of the main dining room. The beautiful Steinway gleamed under the soft lighting. She sat down on the bench, adjusting it to her height, and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment before she began to play. She chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that was both technically impressive and familiar enough to be recognizable to non-musicians. The first delicate notes filled the restaurant, and she could sense the staff gathering behind her, watching in astonishment. As she played, everything else faded away. The anxiety, the pressure, the years of hiding, all of it dissolved into the music. Her fingers found each key with precision, and the melody flowed through the room like water. She closed her eyes, letting herself be fully present in the moment, in the music. When the final notes faded, she opened her eyes to find not just the staff watching her, but Mr. Lamont himself, standing in the doorway with his mouth slightly open in surprise. "Where?" he said after a moment. "Did you learn to play like that?" Before Sophia could answer, Victor stepped in, his previous skepticism completely gone. "Mr. Lamont, I was just about to tell you about our backup plan. Giovanni had a transportation issue, but fortunately, Sophia here has agreed to step in." Mr. Lamont approached the piano, studying Sophia with new interest. "You work here? As a waitress?" "Yes, sir," Sophia replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious in her server's uniform. "And you can play an entire evening's worth of classical music? Without preparation?" Sophia nodded. "I can, sir. I've been playing since I was 4. Mr. Lamont turned to Victor. "Get her something appropriate to wear. And quickly. I can see the mayor's car pulling up outside." The next few minutes were a blur. Lily rushed Sophia to the staff room, where they dug through the lost and found for anything that might work as performance attire. They struck gold with a simple black cocktail dress that someone had left behind after a private event months ago. It was slightly loose on Sophia, but a borrowed belt from another server cinched it at the waist, making it look intentionally elegant. "Your hair," Lily said, quickly pulling out Sophia's practical bun and letting her dark waves fall around her shoulders. "There. You look like a different person." Sophia barely had time to glance in the mirror before Victor was calling for her. Guests were arriving and the piano needed to be played. As she made her way back to the main dining room, now transformed in the simple black dress, Sophia felt as though she were walking in a dream. The Steinway waited for her, its lid propped open to project the sound throughout the room. The first few guests were already being seated, including an older gentleman who Sophia recognized as Anton Riker. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her seat at the piano. This wasn't a basement practice room at midnight. This wasn't even an audition recording sent into the void. This was real, a room full of influential people who would be listening to her play. She placed her fingers on the keys and began with a Mozart sonata, keeping the volume gentle as background for the arriving guests. As more people filled the restaurant, she transitioned to Chopin waltzes, occasionally mixing in some Schubert and Brahms. She could feel occasional glances in her direction, but mostly she was background ambiance, exactly what she'd been hired to be. An hour into the evening, during a brief pause between pieces, she noticed Anton Riker watching her with undisguised interest. Their eyes met briefly before she looked back down at the keys, her heart racing. She decided to take a risk and began playing one of the more challenging Chopin etudes, the kind that demonstrated technical skill that casual listeners might not recognize, but that a professional like Riker certainly would. As she played the complex runs and arpeggios, she noticed more heads turning her way. Conversations paused briefly as people registered that what they were hearing wasn't just pleasant background music, but something more substantial. A waiter passing by with a tray of champagne nearly stumbled, catching himself just in time as he stared at her in surprise. When she finished the etude, she heard something she hadn't expected: applause. It was scattered and brief, but it was real. And as she looked up, she saw Anton Riker nodding appreciatively before returning to his conversation with the mayor. For the first time in 5 years, Sophia felt something she had almost forgotten: the unique joy of sharing music with others who truly heard it. As the evening continued, she played with growing confidence, letting herself enjoy this unexpected opportunity that had literally fallen into her lap. What she didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. Sophia's fingers danced across the keys as the anniversary celebration at Le Chateau continued into the night. The initial nervousness had faded, replaced by a comfortable rhythm as she moved from one piece to another. She had been playing for nearly 2 hours, occasionally glancing up to see new reactions from the guests who had begun to pay more attention to the piano corner. Victor approached during a brief pause between songs, leaning in close so only she could hear. "You're doing wonderfully," he said, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "Mr. Lamont is thrilled. He's telling everyone you were his special surprise for the evening." Sophia couldn't help but smile. "I'm happy I could help." "There's a short break coming up while the main course is served," Victor continued. "Take 15 minutes, get something to drink, rest your hands. Then we'd like you to play something special when dessert is served." "Something special?" Sophia asked. Victor nodded. "Something impressive. Mr. Lamont wants to really showcase you during dessert when everyone will be more relaxed. He mentioned it to Mr. Riker, who specifically requested to hear more of your playing." The mention of Anton Riker sent a flutter of anxiety through Sophia's chest. Playing background music was one thing, but being the center of attention, especially the attention of someone like Riker, was quite another. "I'll think of something," she promised. As Victor walked away, Sophia finished the light Chopin waltz she had been playing and stood up from the piano. Several guests nodded appreciatively as she made her way toward the staff area. She felt oddly disconnected from her surroundings, as if walking in a dream. Just hours ago, she had been setting tables and taking orders, invisible to these same people. In the break room, Lily handed her a glass of water. "You're incredible," she said, eyes wide. "Why didn't you ever tell any of us you could play like that?" Sophia took a sip of water before answering. "It was from another life, before I started working here. Well, you're the talk of the restaurant right now. I've never seen Mr. Lamont so pleased. And that famous music director keeps asking about you." Sophia nearly choked on her water. "What has he been saying?" "Just asking who you are, where you studied, that sort of thing." Lily tilted her head curiously. "Where did you study anyway?" "The Royal Conservatory," Sophia answered, her voice soft with memory. "I was on track for Juilliard before." She trailed off, not wanting to get into the painful details. "Before what?" "Life happened," Sophia said simply. "Family emergency, bills to pay, you know how it goes." Lily looked like she wanted to ask more questions, but Victor poked his head into the break room. "Sophia, Mr. Riker would like to speak with you when you have a moment." A cold wave of panic washed over her. "Now, if possible?" "He's quite insistent." Sophia set down her water glass with a shaky hand. "Okay, I'll go now." She followed Victor back into the dining room, feeling exposed in the borrowed dress. The room seemed to have shifted somehow, or perhaps it was just her perception that had changed. As a waitress, she had moved through this space efficiently but invisibly. Now she noticed glances following her, whispered comments behind napkins. Anton Riker sat at the central table with Mr. Lamont and several other distinguished guests. He was in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on. As Sophia approached, he stood up, a courtesy she wasn't used to receiving in this restaurant. "Ah, here she is, our surprise virtuoso," Mr. Lamont said jovially, clearly in his element as host. "Mr. Riker, may I present Sophia Martinez?" Riker extended his hand. "A pleasure, Ms. Martinez. Your playing is exquisite." "Thank you, sir," Sophia managed, shaking his hand briefly. "That's very kind." "Not kind at all, merely accurate," Riker replied. "I understand from Mr. Lamont that you work here as a waitress?" "Yes, for about 3 years now." "And where did you train?" "Your technique in that Chopin etude was remarkable." "The Royal Conservatory," Sophia said, feeling a strange mix of pride and pain at saying the name again. "I studied there until I was 19. Under whom, if I may ask?" "Professor Henley." Riker's eyebrows rose slightly. "Eleanor Henley? She doesn't take many students." "I was fortunate," Sophia said simply. "Indeed. And may I ask why you're serving tables rather than concertizing? With your level of talent—" "Anton," Mr. Lamont cut in, "perhaps we shouldn't interrogate the poor girl while she's working. We're keeping her from her performance." Sophia shot Mr. Lamont a grateful glance. "Of course," Riker nodded. "But I would very much like to continue this conversation later, Ms. Martinez, if you wouldn't mind." "Not at all," Sophia replied. though her stomach twisted with anxiety at the thought. Wonderful. And for your next set, might I make a request? I'd love to hear what you can do with Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 if it's in your repertoire. Sophia's heart skipped. It was in her repertoire. In fact, it was one of the pieces she had been practicing obsessively in those late nights at the conservatory. But it was also notoriously difficult, with rapid octaves and complex runs that challenged even seasoned concert pianists. I know it, she said quietly. Excellent. I look forward to it. Riker gave a small nod of dismissal, and Sophia took the opportunity to retreat back to the piano. Her hands trembled as she sat down on the bench again. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody wasn't background music. It was a showpiece meant to display technical prowess and emotional depth. Playing it meant stepping fully into the spotlight, claiming her identity as a serious musician, rather than just filling in for a missing performer. The serving staff had begun bringing out the main courses, which gave her a few more minutes to prepare. She flexed her fingers and took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. As she waited, she noticed a few faces she hadn't seen earlier in the evening. A woman in an elegant blue dress who Sophia recognized as the director of the city's Arts Foundation. A man with a press badge partially hidden in his jacket pocket, likely covering the event for the local cultural paper. And then, at a small table near the back, someone who made Sophia's breath catch, Professor Eleanor Henley herself. Her former teacher was sitting with a younger man Sophia didn't recognize. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Sophia saw surprise register on the older woman's face. There was no time to process this discovery. Victor was giving her the signal that dessert would soon be served, and it was time for her special performance. Sophia straightened her borrowed dress, took a final deep breath, and positioned her hands over the keys. The first delicate notes of the Hungarian Rhapsody filled the room. Sophia started softly, letting the familiar introduction build gradually. Conversations around the room slowly died down as guests began to notice that something different was happening. By the time she reached the first virtuosic section, with its rapid scales and crossing hands, the dining room had fallen almost completely silent. She forgot about Anton Riker watching her. She forgot about Professor Henley in the back. She forgot about the borrowed dress and her double life and everything, except the music flowing from her fingers. The piece built in intensity, and Sophia poured everything she had into it. All the emotion she'd kept bottled up for years, all the music she'd played alone in empty rooms, all the dreams she'd set aside. Her fingers flew across the keys during the frenzied Friska section, building to a feverish pace that demanded every ounce of her technical ability. She could feel sweat beating on her forehead, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, she was truly alive, truly herself. As she thundered through the final triumphant chords, Sophia was vaguely aware that the entire restaurant had stopped. Waiters stood frozen with trays. Guests sat with dessert forks suspended midair. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen. When the last note rang out, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, applause erupted, not the polite, distracted clapping from earlier, but real, enthusiastic applause with cheers and even a few standing ovations. Sophia sat stunned at the piano, her chest heaving with exertion and emotion. Anton Riker was on his feet, applauding with unrestrained enthusiasm. Mr. Lamont looked both shocked and delighted. And at the back of the room, Professor Henley was watching with an unreadable expression, her hands pressed together in front of her. As the applause began to subside, Sophia noticed that her cheeks were wet. She quickly wiped away the tears, embarrassed at this public display of emotion. But when she looked up again, she saw that she wasn't the only one affected. Several guests were discreetly dabbing at their eyes, moved by the raw emotion of her performance. Victor appeared at her side, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Sophia," he whispered, I don't even have words." "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. "Mr. Riker would like you to join them at his table when you're ready," Victor said. "And Professor Henley has asked to speak with you as well." He paused. "I had no idea, Sophia. All this time, neither did I," she admitted quietly. "Not really." As Sophia stood on shaky legs, ready to face whatever came next, she realized that something fundamental had shifted. She had stepped into the light, revealing the part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. There was no going back to being invisible now. The borrowed dress, the elegant restaurant, the distinguished guests, none of it mattered as much as the simple truth that had been revealed tonight. The music had never left her. It had been waiting patiently all this time, and now finally it had found its voice again. The days following Sophia's unexpected performance at Le Chateau passed in a whirlwind. She had barely slept that night, replaying every moment in her mind, the shocked faces, the thunderous applause, and most importantly, the conversations that followed. Anton Riker had been direct and businesslike when she joined his table after her performance. "You have exceptional talent, Ms. Martinez," he had said, offering her a seat beside him. "Talent that shouldn't be serving appetizers." "If you'll forgive my bluntness," Mr. Lamont had chimed in enthusiastically. Suddenly her biggest supporter, despite having never noticed her musical abilities during her 3 years of employment. "I've always thought Sophia had something special about her," he claimed, to the barely concealed eye rolls of nearby staff who knew better. But it was the conversation with Professor Henley that had affected Sophia most deeply. Her former teacher had waited until the crowd around Sophia had thinned before approaching, her familiar perfume bringing back a flood of memories from Sophia's conservatory days. "I always wondered what happened to you," Professor Henley had said quietly, her voice carrying the slight Polish accent that had intimidated generations of piano students. "One day you were my most promising pupil, the next you were gone." Sophia had struggled to meet her eyes. "My parents died. Car accident. There were medical bills, funeral costs. Music seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford anymore." "Music is never a luxury, Sophia. It's oxygen." The older woman's eyes had softened. "But I understand why you left. What I don't understand is why you never came back." The question had lingered with Sophia through her first shift back at Le Chateau, 2 days after the anniversary event. Everything felt different now. Victor treated her with a new respect. Customers who had been at the celebration recognized her and requested songs. And even Roy in the kitchen had prepared her favorite staff meal without her asking. "The famous pianist graces us with her presence," he teased good-naturedly when she came to pick up an order. "Should I be asking for your autograph before you get too important for us?" Sophia laughed, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty in her interactions now. She existed in a strange middle ground, no longer just a waitress, but not quite the concert pianist she had once dreamed of becoming. On her break, she checked her phone and found 3 new messages. One from Victor asking about her availability for future piano performances at the restaurant. One from Professor Henley suggesting they meet for coffee. And one from an unknown number that simply read, "Ms. Martinez, this is Anton Riker. Please call me at your earliest convenience regarding an opportunity with the symphony. I believe we can help each other." Her hands trembled slightly as she read Riker's message again. The City Symphony was prestigious with international tours and recordings. What possible opportunity could he have in mind for someone who had been out of serious musical training for 5 years? After her shift ended, Sophia walked to her small apartment, her mind racing with possibilities. She had already decided to accept Professor Henley's invitation for coffee, scheduling it for the following morning. But Riker's message required an immediate response. She dialed the number, half hoping it would go to voicemail. Anton Riker speaking. His crisp voice answered on the second ring. "Mr. Riker, this is Sophia Martinez returning your call." "Ah. Ms. Martinez, thank you for getting back to me so promptly." There was the sound of papers shuffling. "I'll get right to the point. Our pianist for this weekend's charity gala has withdrawn due to a family emergency. The program includes Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, which I believe is in your repertoire based on our conversation." Sophia's heart nearly stopped. "You want me to perform with the symphony? This weekend?" "That's correct. It's short notice, I realize, but after hearing you play, I'm confident in your abilities. It would be a paid performance, of course, and could potentially lead to other opportunities if all goes well." The Rachmaninoff concerto was indeed in her repertoire. It was the very piece she had been practicing obsessively in those late-night sessions. But performing it with a full orchestra, with just days to prepare after 5 years away from the concert stage? I don't know what to say," Sophia stammered. "Say yes," Riker replied simply. "You have the talent. The rest is just logistics. We can arrange for you to rehearse with the orchestra tomorrow and Friday." Sophia took a deep breath. "Then yes, I'd be honored. Excellent. My assistant will email you the details shortly. I look forward to seeing what you can do with a proper orchestra behind you, Ms. Martinez. After the call ended, Sophia sat in stunned silence in her apartment. The walls, which had always seemed cozy enough before, suddenly felt confining. She paced the small living room, alternating between exhilaration and terror. Was she really going to do this? Perform with the symphony after all these years? Her phone buzzed again with an email containing the details Riker had promised. The charity gala was a major event benefiting the Children's Hospital. Tickets cost more than Sophia made in a week at Le Chateau. The guest list included the city's elite major donors and even a few minor celebrities. And there, listed as the featured soloist for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, was her name, Sophia Martinez. The next morning, she met Professor Henley at a small cafe near the conservatory. The older woman was already there, a pot of tea steaming on the table. "You look tired," Professor Henley observed as Sophia sat down. "But there's a light in your eyes I haven't seen in years." "Mr. Riker asked me to perform with the symphony this weekend," Sophia blurted out, still hardly believing it herself. Professor Henley's eyebrows rose slightly. "The charity gala? That's quite an opportunity." "It's terrifying," Sophia admitted. "I haven't performed with an orchestra in 5 years. What if I freeze? What if I've forgotten how it feels to play with others?" "Playing with an orchestra is like riding a bicycle," Professor Henley said, pouring tea into Sophia's cup. "The body remembers even when the mind doubts." She stirred a small spoonful of honey into her own tea. "What does concern me is that you've been away from serious performance for so long. Your technique at Le Chateau was impressive, but a concerto is different from solo pieces." "I've been practicing the Rachmaninoff for months," Sophia said. "Not for any particular reason, just because I love it." Professor Henley smiled. "That's the best reason." She took a sip of her tea, studying Sophia over the rim of the cup. "You know, I still have my key to the practice rooms at the conservatory. The good ones with the concert grand pianos. Perhaps we could go there after our tea? See if I can offer any guidance before your rehearsal with the orchestra." Sophia felt a rush of gratitude. "I would appreciate that more than I can say." 2 hours later, Sophia sat at a gleaming Bosendorfer grand piano in one of the conservatory's best practice rooms. Professor Henley standing beside her with the familiar stern expression that had motivated Sophia through her teenage years. "Again," Professor Henley said after Sophia finished playing the first movement of the concerto. "And this time, don't hold back in the cadenza. You're being too careful, too precise. Rachmaninoff requires both technical precision and emotional abandon. It's a difficult balance." Sophia nodded and began again, trying to let go of the restraint that had become habitual during her years of private playing. As she reached the cadenza, she closed her eyes, letting her fingers fly across the keys with greater freedom. The rich, resonant tones of the Bosendorfer filled the room, so different from the upright piano she practiced on at night or even the Steinway at Le Chateau. When she finished, Professor Henley was silent for a moment. "Better," she finally said. "Much better. But you're still playing like someone who's afraid of making a mistake. The audience doesn't want perfection, Sophia. They want truth. They want to feel what you feel." The words stayed with Sophia as she arrived at Symphony Hall later that afternoon for her first rehearsal with the orchestra. The historic building was intimidating with its grand facade and imposing lobby, filled with photographs of famous musicians who had performed there over the decades. Sophia felt small and underdressed in her simple jeans and blouse as she was led backstage to meet the orchestra. The conductor, a tall woman named Diane Powell, greeted her with professional courtesy. "Mr. Riker speaks highly of your abilities," she said, shaking Sophia's hand. "We're fortunate you were available on such short notice." The orchestra members, already seated on stage, regarded her with curious expressions. Sophia knew what they must be thinking. Who is this unknown pianist stepping in at the last minute? Is she up to the challenge of Rachmaninoff? She would have to prove herself. The rehearsal began tentatively. Sophia was hyper-aware of every note, every entrance, every dynamic marking in the score. She played competently but cautiously, focusing on coordinating with the orchestra rather than expressing the emotional depths of the piece. After running through the first movement, Conductor Powell tapped her baton on the music stand. "Ms. Martinez, the notes are all there, but I'm not feeling the heart of the piece. Remember that Rachmaninoff wrote this after a period of deep depression. It's a journey from darkness to light. We need to feel that struggle, that triumph. Sophia nodded, remembering Professor Henley's similar words. As they began the second movement with its hauntingly beautiful melody, she tried to let go of her fear of making mistakes. Instead, she focused on the emotions behind the notes, the longing, the hope, the gradual awakening to joy. By the time they reached the famous third movement, something had shifted. The orchestra responded to her playing, matching her energy and expression. When she launched into the triumphant finale, it was as if they were all breathing together, creating something larger than any of them could have created alone. As the last chord resounded through the hall, there was a moment of charged silence, followed by the orchestra members tapping their bows on their music stands, a musician's applause during rehearsal. Conductor Powell gave a satisfied nod. "That's what we're looking for. Let's take a short break and then run through it once more." During the break, several orchestra members approached Sophia with warm words and encouragement. An older violinist squeezed her shoulder gently. "Where have you been hiding, young lady? That was some beautiful playing." The next 2 days passed in a blur of rehearsals and practice. Sophia had called Victor to explain her absence from Le Chateau, and he had been unexpectedly supportive. "This is your chance," he told her. "We'll be here if it doesn't work out, but something tells me we're going to be bragging about having employed the famous Sofia Martinez in the future." On Saturday evening, Sophia stood backstage at Symphony Hall, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the audience must be able to hear it. She wore a midnight blue gown borrowed from the symphony's wardrobe department, her dark hair swept up elegantly. Through the small monitor, she could see the hall filling with people in formal attire, could hear the rising murmur of conversations and the occasional laugh. Professor Henley appeared beside her, having come to offer moral support. "Remember," she said quietly, "they're not here to judge you. They're here to be moved. Let the music speak through you." Sophia nodded, too nervous for words. A stagehand appeared. "2 minutes, Ms. Martinez." As the orchestra began to tune, Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought of her parents, who had sacrificed so much for her musical education. She thought of the years at Le Chateau, carrying plates instead of playing concertos. She thought of that night at the anniversary celebration when everything had changed. When her name was announced and she walked onto the stage, the polite applause washing over her, Sophia felt strangely calm. She took her place at the magnificent concert grand piano, adjusted the bench and nodded to Conductor Powell that she was ready. The orchestra began the dark, brooding introduction to the concerto. Sophia watched, counting measures, feeling the music build around her. And then, as her entrance approached, she let go of everything except the present moment and the piano before her. Her fingers touched the keys, and the journey began. The first notes Sophia played with the orchestra seemed to float above the hushed audience. Time slowed as her fingers found each key with precision and feeling. The months of late-night practice, the years of carrying the music silently within her, it all converged in this moment as she performed the Rachmaninoff concerto. She was vaguely aware of the orchestra responding to her playing, of Conductor Powell's encouraging glances, of the magnificent sound filling the concert hall. But mostly, she was aware of the music itself, flowing through her like a current of electricity. Each phrase told a story, of loss and longing, of struggle and eventual triumph. The first movement built to its powerful climax, and Sophia felt rather than decided each dynamic shift, each subtle rubato. When she reached the cadenza, she surrendered completely to the moment, her fingers flying across the keys with both abandon and control. The technical challenges that had once seemed so daunting now felt like a natural language she had always known how to speak. As the movement concluded and the audience applauded, Sophia caught Professor Henley's eye from her seat in the front row. The older woman gave an almost imperceptible nod of approval that meant more to Sophia than a standing ovation. The second movement began with its achingly beautiful melody. Sophia let the notes sing, creating long, unbroken lines that seemed to reach for something just beyond grasp. She thought of her parents, of the life she'd put on pause, of the dreams she'd set aside. There was sadness in her playing, but also acceptance and a quiet kind of hope. By the time they reached the famous third movement, with its triumphant theme and driving energy, Sophia was no longer thinking about technique or performance. She was simply living inside the music, riding its waves of emotion. The final chords resounded through the hall like a declaration. For a moment after the last note faded, there was complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause. Sophia stood on shaky legs to take her bow, and to her surprise, the entire crowd rose to their feet. The sound was deafening. Applause, cheers, even a few whistles from the balcony. Conductor Powell shook her hand warmly, and the concertmaster stepped forward to offer congratulations. Sophia took another bow, then another, overwhelmed by the response. Someone handed her a bouquet of flowers, which she clutched like a lifeline as she made her way off stage. In the wings, Anton Riker waited with an uncharacteristic smile. "That," he said simply, "is why I asked you to play. Brava, Ms. Martinez." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. There was a reception after the concert where donors and symphony board members wanted to meet her. People whose names she couldn't remember shook her hand and praised her performance. A wine glass was pressed into her hand, then replaced when she absently set it down somewhere. Professor Henley stayed close by, occasionally steering Sophia toward important people or rescuing her from conversations that went on too long. "You must be exhausted," the professor finally said, noticing Sophia's increasingly dazed expression. "Let me take you home." In the quiet of Professor Henley's car, Sophia finally found her voice again. Was it really as good as they're saying? The older woman glanced at her with a gentle smile. "It was better. You've always had the technique, Sophia. Tonight you found the courage to show your heart as well." When they reached Sophia's apartment building, Professor Henley turned to her before she could get out. "Sophia, there's something I need to tell you. I've been appointed to the faculty of the Westridge Music Academy next fall." Sophia blinked in surprise. Westridge was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. "That's wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you. The reason I'm telling you is that they offer a special program for exceptional musicians who had to interrupt their training. Full scholarship, flexible schedule, personalized curriculum." She paused. "I've already spoken to the dean about you." Sophia's breath caught. "You want me to apply? I want you to consider it. After what you showed tonight, any conservatory would be lucky to have you." Professor Henley reached over to squeeze Sophia's hand. "Just think about it. You don't have to decide tonight." But as Sophia climbed the stairs to her apartment, still in the borrowed gown with the bouquet in her arms, she already knew her answer. The music had reclaimed her tonight, or perhaps she had reclaimed it. Either way, there was no going back to the life she had been living. The next few weeks brought changes Sophia could never have imagined. The local newspaper ran a feature story about her performance and unusual journey from waitress to soloist. Anton Riker offered her a position as a guest soloist for 3 more symphony performances in the upcoming season. And most surprisingly, Mr. Lamont approached her with a business proposition. "I'd like to offer you a new position at Le Chateau," he said when she returned for what she had intended to be her final shift to say goodbye to her colleagues. "Our piano sits empty most nights. What if you played 3 evenings a week? We'd pay you 3 times your current salary, and you'd have the flexibility to pursue other performance opportunities." Sophia was touched by the offer but uncertain. "I'm applying to Westridge for the fall. If I'm accepted, I won't be able to commit to a regular schedule." Mr. Lamont waved his hand dismissively. "We'll work around your studies. Think of it as a standing invitation. Whenever you're available, there's a place for you at our piano." So Sophia found herself in a strange transition period. No longer just a waitress, not quite a full-time musician, somewhere in between her past and future. She continued to work at Le Chateau 2 nights a week, now as the featured pianist rather than a server. She practiced with renewed purpose, preparing both for upcoming symphony performances and her audition for Westridge. And she began to compose again, creating original pieces that expressed her unique musical voice. Late at night after her performances at Le Chateau, she would sit at the conservatory's pianos, working on a composition that had begun to take shape in her mind, a piece about hidden talents and second chances. 6 months after her debut with the symphony, Sophia stood backstage at the city's grand concert hall. Tonight was different from that first performance in every way. Her name was featured prominently on the posters outside. The program included not only pieces by Chopin and Debussy, but also the premiere of her own composition, Unveiled. Her parents' photograph sat on a small table in her dressing room, a private reminder of the journey that had brought her here. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. 10 minutes, Ms. Martinez, called a stagehand. Thank you, she replied, smoothing the fabric of her new gown, one she had chosen herself, bought with her own earnings as a musician. Another knock, softer this time. Professor Henley entered, elegant in a formal suit. Since Sophia's acceptance to Westridge, the older woman had become not just her former teacher, but her mentor and friend. Ready? Professor Henley asked. I think so. Sophia took a deep breath. It still doesn't feel quite real. It is very real, Professor Henley assured her. You've earned this, Sophia. Not just with your talent, but with your perseverance. She straightened Sophia's necklace slightly. I'm proud of you. And your parents would be too. Tears threatened, but Sophia blinked them away. I keep thinking about that night at Le Chateau. If Giovanni Bianchi's taxi hadn't been delayed, then your moment would have come another way, Professor Henley said firmly. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. The music finds a way. As they walked toward the stage, Sophia passed a familiar face, Roy from the Le Chateau kitchen, looking somewhat uncomfortable in a suit but beaming with pride. Behind him, she spotted Victor, Lily, and several other staff members who had come to support her. And there in the front row, she knew Anton Riker would be sitting with members of the Westridge faculty and representatives from a recording label that had expressed interest in her original compositions. The path ahead was taking shape, full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The stage door opened, and the sound of the waiting audience washed over her. The same mix of nerves and excitement she'd felt that first night tingled through her body. But now there was something else too. A quiet confidence, a sense of belonging. This is it, Professor Henley said softly. Sophia nodded. This is just the beginning. As her name was announced and applause filled the concert hall, Sophia stepped into the light. She walked to the gleaming grand piano at the center of the stage, acknowledging the audience with a graceful bow. Then she took her seat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of her own composition filled the hall, a melody that began quietly, tentatively, like a question being asked. But as it developed, it grew in confidence and complexity, building to a theme that sang of discovery and renewal. In the front row, Professor Henley smiled. In the kitchen of Le Chateau, now closed for the evening because the entire staff had insisted on attending the concert, a radio played the live broadcast. Throughout the city, people who had read Sophia's story or heard about the waitress who became a pianist overnight tuned in to listen. And in a small apartment across town, on a shelf above an upright piano, a letter from Westridge Music Academy sat beside a framed review of her symphony debut. Beside them was a small notebook filled with musical notations and ideas for future compositions, plans and dreams for a life reclaimed. On stage, Sophia played with her whole heart, each note a step further into her new beginning. The music flowed through her fingers, telling the story of a journey that had really just begun, a story of hidden talents revealed, of second chances embraced, and of the courage to step into the spotlight and show the world your true self. As the final chords of Unveiled resonated through the hall, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The long detour of the past 5 years hadn't been a mistake after all, but part of a longer path that had led her here, to this moment, to this music that was finally being heard. The waitress who stepped to the piano had found her way home.